What is up, everybody? Welcome to a brand new episode of the Run Your Mouth podcast. It's a special Sunday edition with our chief war correspondent, Kyle Anzalone. Thank you so much for joining me on a Sunday night. I know it's the weekend, you wanted to relax, but Trump doesn't take the weekends off, so we can't either.
Now, my work week starts on Sunday, Robbie, so actually I'm just staying up a little bit later than normal, but that's all.
All right, I love it, and listen, I wish we didn't have to broadcast on a Sunday, but it's unbelievable the mess that Trump has gotten us into, and I've been glued to Twitter. I'm trying to figure out what's going on. So sticking to my title, let's start with this. Give us the breakdown. Currently, who's winning this war?
Well, I don't think anybody is currently winning this war. I don't think it's going the way the Americans wanted to, and Iran is being heavily bombed. I guess it may be going closer to the Iranian script than the American script as far as, executing the offensive and defensive plans. But that is making some assumptions that Iran has a stockpile of missiles large enough still and the launchers to fire them, and the men willing to go out there in these launchers in highly dangerous missions and launch them at Israel and American bases and American allies in the Middle East. I mean, it appears right now they still possess that capability. And so, again, it's hard to say, right, when Tehran is on fire, right? There's literally a black cloud that didn't let sunlight into the city today, because the Americans or the Israelis burned a massive oil refinery right outside of the city. But at the same time, the fact that the Iranians are still fighting, that every day the Iranians are launching missiles and drones at Western countries, they're further depleting and wearing down the Israeli and American defenses. And I think the Iranian strategy is basically to not only run the U.S. out of the interceptors, but start to poke holes in our network of radars that are across the Middle East that allows the United States interceptors to be as effective as they are, because they're able to detect early warning sites. And look, this isn't just me. I filled in for Scott Horton on Provoked this week with Daryl Cooper, who actually, when he was in the military, not only is he a brilliant historian, but when he was in the military, he operated missile defense systems aboard ships. So he is an expert on this. And, the Iranian plan is to poke holes in the network of radars that we have and eventually degrade the American and Israeli military to effectively use their missile interceptors, at which point, maybe they feel like either they'll do enough damage to the Americans to prove a point, or will be in a position where they can negotiate on favorable terms. So it certainly seems like the Iranians are on the pathway to executing that plan, where I don't know what the American plan is. I'm not sure if Trump and the White House know what the American plan is. But the fact that we've gone from this is supposed to be a 2 to 4 day war to a 2 to 4 week war to an 8-week war to planning for this war going through to September, it's pretty clear that the American battle plans aren't being executed as they had hoped.
All right, so we got a ton to get into, and I don't want to ADD too much, but on the note of the black skies, my theory is that Donald Trump saw the CNN footage of, look, everything's calm in Tehran, the regime isn't failing, and was like, oh, you think it's calm? You don't think it's a nightmare? And then they blacken the entire skies. But before
I think you're absolutely correct on that. I actually saw when CNN was doing that coverage, and I thought, oh my God. Like Trump is going to see this and he's going to freak out. And Pete Hegseth is going to feel embarrassed for not doing enough damage to Tehran, that the civilians are running and fleeing and crying, and that the scenes don't look like they're out of Gaza. So they're trying to create that. Now, if I could make one more point on that, Robbie, I think it might have been a strategic blunder. One of the things that different groups in the Middle East have done over the years is to light oil wells on fire, or to build trenches with oil and light that on fire, because it's one of the few things that blats out America's massive array of imaging and makes it more difficult for radars to work. And so this may have given Iran a strategic advantage to move assets around Tehran, at least for a short window, when obviously you're not taking pictures through that cloud, and even infrared and other sensors and things like that are at least going to be less functional, if not outright blocked out. So I bet in like 2-3 weeks, maybe a couple months, we find out that this actually caused a massive setback in the American bombing campaign.
All right, so listen, we got a ton to cover, but just sticking to the actual logistics and who's winning this thing. The way I see it is Donald Trump reached out to negotiate, and they don't want to negotiate. That makes sense to me because the 2 times they've sat down to negotiate, Trump just bombed them anyways. And so I think at this point, they think they got an untrustworthy partner, and they got to make this thing very costly. And we're kind of down to, because Donald Trump has said absolute surrender, and I think Iran wants to make this as expensive as possible, and to have allies in the region very upset with us for lack of actually offering them security and messing up their oil business, that it gets to the point that we have to just get out and then the regime survives. So we're basically kind of at, there's only one, it's seemingly, I was hoping Donald Trump was going to take the off-ramp, say we killed Khamenei, it's a regime change. He didn't take that off-ramp. And so the way it looks like now is we're playing for keeps, and we're playing to the finish. Now,
well, can I just add on that point really quick there on that off-ramp? I think Netanyahu blew up that off-ramp. I think that Netanyahu knew that was the off-ramp that Donald Trump wanted to take. And so Donald Trump said this, that they killed all the people that they wanted to take over Iran were killed in Israeli strikes in the first couple waves of the bombing. And I think what Trump said was, they killed the people we wanted. They killed the second wave of people they wanted. They probably killed the third wave of people we wanted. And pretty soon we're not going to know anybody. And so it's very possible that Netanyahu saw that possibility, but that's not what Israel wants, because that leaves a strong, united country of 90 million proud Muslims that are probably going to be, somewhat coalesced and want to be more hardline nationally and maybe support their groups in the Middle East. So he wants to make sure this is a long, drawn-out conflict that really weakens and potentially fractures Persia, right? That's his goal. And so he made sure that couldn't happen by the United States not being able to say, hey, if you put this guy in charge, we're all good here.
Now, is it, before we get back to logistics, is it true that Netanyahu also thwarted the earlier negotiations? Because there was at least, the problem with scrolling Twitter is it takes quite a bit of effort to separate fact from fiction, and then I just absorb a lot of information, and I got to go out and clarify it. But one of the things I was seeing was Netanyahu reaching out to Trump and being like, is it true that you've reached out to the Iranians directly? And then Trump being like, no, I would never do that. You're the boss here. We would never go behind your backs and try and talk to them. Was there an earlier actual honest negotiation effort, not Witkoff and Kushner, but Trump directly trying to reach out to the Iranians that Netanyahu found out about and, put his foot on?
I don't know if it was good faith. I think probably Trump tried to send a message to Tehran that was along the lines of, if you want to surrender, we will accept it. That's what he thought was going to happen. But I don't think he put out a sincere effort. But yeah, according to Axios, Netanyahu did reach out for a direct conversation with Donald Trump to make sure that he wasn't engaged in talks with the Iranians. So it goes to show how anxious Israel is about this being a short conflict.
Okay, and now it seems like, from what I gather of kind of the logistics of this thing, is that Iran's got a lot of really cheap stuff, or relatively cheaper to what we spend on missile defenses and Patriot missiles. And so they've kind of been lobbing the cheap shit to eat away at our very expensive stuff. And now it's kind of a question of how much of a stockpile do they still have that they can do severe damage, and what's the U.S. ability to basically take out those stockpiles. What's your takeaway at the moment? Do they have a ton of stuff that they haven't used? Is the Americans and Israelis doing a good job of taking out stockpiles? Like, if you're trying to look at what the next 3 weeks look like, is Iran just pumping out these drones and pumping out their missiles and they're good to go for, another month and they're going to bleed us dry? Or is the U.S. doing a good job of disarming them?
I don't think the U.S. is doing a good job of disarming them. It seems that Iran has more advanced missile capabilities, both on the launcher end and the actual munition itself, than was anticipated. They're firing what people are calling a cluster munition, which I'm not sure if that's actually what it is. I think it's a multiple independent reentry vehicle where it's one very large rocket that separates into like 1 or 2 dozen smaller missiles that then are able to hit a target in a large area, where a cluster munition is more of an anti-personnel, like drop small grenades over a large area, something like that. So those are very hard to hit, obviously, because you don't know exactly how many warheads you're going to have coming out, where the targets are going to be. So that seems to be more advanced than planned. I saw videos, and there's been these videos published and confirmed that Iran is firing missiles essentially out of the flat ground, that they have tunnel networks underground, and they have launchers that just flat with the surface, missiles, dust flying out of the air. I mean, they have some advanced capabilities. And while the U.S. is estimating Iran's missile stockpile, they were wrong about it during the 12-day war in June. They thought Iran was going to run out of missiles far before they did. I really don't have any advanced insights. Some people say that the pace of Iranian missile strikes is slowing down, but that could be due to targeting information. Even if Iran has a lot of missiles, they may not know exactly where to program into targets, particularly targets that are going to be somewhat vulnerable and not well defended. Yeah, I'm sure they know where Israeli and U.S. military bases are, but that's also where the most advanced radars and missile defense systems are going to be positioned to defend. Other areas like downtown Abu Dhabi or in Bahrain, hotel rooms where there's U.S. soldiers or personnel may be easier to hit, but obviously getting that targeting information is a lot harder to come by. But they have been able to. This was reported in the Washington Post. I think it was in Bahrain or maybe Kuwait. There were 2 American defense officials who were injured in a hotel room by an Iranian drone strike. And so I don't think the Iranians are just randomly striking hotels. I think they're doing fairly targeted strikes on what they believe are locations of U.S. defense personnel. So it's really hard to say, Robbie. I do think if you look at the number of American radar systems that have been hit in the Middle East, I think by my count, it's about 8, although it's really hard to confirm. There's all this open source intelligence of people analyzing satellite information, and a lot of good work has been done there. But now with AI ability to generate fates, it's sometimes hard to tell. But multiple THAAD missile defense radars have been hit. Early warning detection systems in Kuwait and Qatar, which are key, have been hit. And so maybe Iran is really slowing the rate that they're firing their missiles right now, knowing that when they fire them now, the U.S. and Israel are going to have like a 50% chance or so of shooting down the missiles. Whereas if they're able to punch a few more holes in these radar systems, once they're able to identify where they are and when it's going to be a vulnerable time to attack, then they're going to have success rates that are like 80 or 90%. So they're just kind of biding their time and doing this slowly. And also there's the factor of right now, it seems that the U.S. ships are hanging out pretty far away from Iran. But if Trump executes his plan to escort, cargo tankers through the Middle East carrying oil and things like that through the Strait of Hormuz, then Iran maybe has a lot of missile capabilities that they haven't even used yet. They're short-range anti-ship missiles. So who knows what the Iranians have, I guess is the point.
All right. Well, I think time is on Iran's side, but I'm going to ADD. I want to shelve that for 1 second and
Sure.
just ask, What's been the damage to military bases thus far from Iran? I've seen, different reports of they've decimated our bases to Trump claiming we're winning the war and they've done nothing. I actually spoke to some military personnel over the weekend and said that's all fake news. You read that on CNN. The only thing that they damaged was the deaths that they got were on a bunch of people who were, it was a cheap shot by Iran basically on a bunch of military guys with storage units or something. So give us the actual details, at least as far as you know. What's been the damage thus far on military bases?
Yeah, so I mean, I talked to Daryl Cooper about this, and obviously he's not CNN, and he said that the damage he seemed to stay extensive, although I think there's a little bit of caveat in what he was explaining, which is there's not really targets left at these military bases for Iran to hit once they've hit some of the long-range radar station there. A lot of that was moved out of the Middle East, and so I guess if Iran wanted to, they could put holes in runways, they could blow up hangars, they could destroy staff buildings, but there's nobody inside there, and it's not really an operational military base right now. I think Daryl's point that he was making on Provoked was essentially there's not a whole lot of targets left at these immediate military bases to hit. So maybe to say that they were destroyed isn't exactly the most accurate, although there has definitely been some damage done. I think fuel tanks and things like that, those bases. So they have been hit, but there's not a whole lot of targets there worth hitting. And so it's not like, if you looked at an image of it, a U.S. military base doesn't look like Gaza, but there's nothing there for the Iranians to hit right now, and everything of value has been hit.
All right, so before I ask this next question, I want to just make it clear in case anyone has a different takeaway with what I'm about to say next. I think that this was an epic blunder by Donald Trump. I don't think we needed to do this, and I think it was put a lot of risk on our plate. With all that said, I'm still hoping for the best. I want the deep state to learn its lesson that we can't support Israel and we can't have these wars, but I'd like to do it, maybe with the Thomas Massie and the voting public and not with the end of our empire. So I just want to make it clear before I make this next point, I'm not rooting against our military and I'm not rooting against Donald Trump. But I would love to, in an ideal world, I'd love for Donald Trump just to declare victory and that we can move on. But the pathway to victory I'm seeing for Iran here is that if they can keep this war going for longer, I think when gas prices really start going up in America, that's when you're going to see outrage. And I think where Donald Trump really might have weakened our empire is that, our deal with all these countries out in the Middle East was essentially you're selling your oil in dollars, you're going to buy our treasuries, you're going to invest in the U.S., and you're going to buy our military gear, and in response, we're going to protect you. And now these people are just trying to run a good old-fashioned oil business that's run by dictatorships. But they're running an oil company. It might be an evil oil company, but they're running an oil company, and this really sucks for their business. And now they're turning around, I think, and going, hey, we're canceling contracts. And I think that all of these countries are going to be looking to get out of the United States business because this is not keeping them safe and it's not keeping their business stable. I don't think they like what's happening here. On top of that, it almost feels to me like we're in World War III because, the same as we were working with Ukraine to basically be at war with Russia without being at war with Russia, you've got China supposedly, and also Russia is basically giving targets over to the Iranians so that they can hit stuff. So it seems to me the regime just needs to survive and make this so expensive that Israel and Donald Trump walk back. And then at that case, I think we're in a fantastically weaker position because we showcased we can't just always kick ass and that there aren't repercussions for what happened. So, which brings me to my next point, which is how this war is actually being fought and what I see as a major strategic blunder of that the United States of America, firstly on their first strikes, they killed civilians. So, that doesn't help for claiming the moral high ground or not targeting civilians. But then over the last couple of days, it's reported that they hit out a desalination plant. I think I said that word right. And then they just popped an oil field in Iran. And now, if Iran wants to create the most amount of havoc in the region and piss off our allies as much as possible, if they start targeting oil fields in other countries and taking out the desalination plants that, these countries are now scrambling for water and critical infrastructure is completely out the window, that seems like the worst case scenario for the United States of America, where all of the other countries, such as maybe Saudi Arabia, the UAE, just all of these countries are like, what the fuck did you just do, Trump?
Yeah. So this is crazy to me that the U.S. would have taken this step first, because Iran does, get most of their water through other means. They're not pulling seawater, taking the salt out of it and turning it into drinking water. But a lot of our Arab allies, and particularly Israel, do rely on a lot of it. Now, Iran may hesitate to just start hitting the UAEs and Qatars and Saudi Arabia's, water treatment facilities and oil wells and things like that, because those countries do have militaries and they're not currently using them to attack Iran, even though Iran is hitting targets in their cities. Certainly debris, at least from the Iranian drones, are killing civilians in those cities. And so there's a very delicate balance going on between Iran and the Gulf states right now that Tehran probably doesn't want to upend. And also, I think from the Iranian perspective, when you look at what could happen in the Middle East if this goes sideways for the United States, and if the U.S. is maybe forced to pull out some of its bases, these are a lot of monarchies and other types of just authoritarian rulers in the Middle East who are largely propped up by the American military presence in their country. And if the American Fifth Fleet was no longer in Bahrain, who says that the Shia majority of that country doesn't rise up and overthrow the Sunni monarchy? And certainly things like that could play out in Iran and other countries. And the point being, if you start bombing the water treatment facilities in Saudi Arabia, the people who are going to be thirsty are going to be the Shia, not the Sunni rulers and the royal family. And so at least that has to be something to consider from the Iranian perspective, is that they would be hurting the very people in the Middle East who are probably most loyal to them and would see them as some sort of liberators. I think that changes in Israel. I think Iran will probably start to target more Israeli civilian infrastructure and crucial civilian infrastructure, like the water treatment facilities, maybe sewage plants, power plants, oil refineries, oil taints, and all kinds of stuff like they're doing in Iran.
And thus far, what has Iran mostly been trying to target? Has it been mostly military targets, or have they been going after civilians?
I don't know if Iran is ever directly target. Like, I don't know if Iran has fired a missile with the programmed GPS coordinates being a hospital or a school. Certainly civilian targets, residential buildings have been hit in Israel, in the Gulf countries. Like I said, hotels in the Gulf countries. Now, Iran is arguing that these are in some ways military targets, either because military personnel is in there. Maybe there's an Iron Dome system on the street outside the residential building. And both governments have really locked down on the amount of footage getting out, actually showing, because during the 12-day war, I don't know if you remember, Robbie, there was video everywhere, very good cell phone camera video where you could see from 4 different angles an Iranian missile coming in and either getting intercepted by an Israeli interceptor, or it barely gets through and hits its target, right? This time there's definitely not as much of that content, even though I think there's just as much rocket and missile fire going on. And that's because both governments have really restricted that, because the information is so valuable to either side on programming their targets and missiles and understanding the capability of missiles and interceptors. So I just have no idea to evaluate that aspect, but Iran is claiming they're targeting military targets. I think that's probably generally true. I'm not sure if there's been times where they fired indiscriminately. And of course, whenever you're talking about missiles and drones being fired, not only are there interceptors, but there's other forms of electronic warfare as well, particularly when it comes to a drone. If a drone is supposed to have a certain course and it gets disabled, it's just going to fly in the direction that it's going a lot of times until it crashes into something. And so, certainly civilian targets have been hit and civilians have been killed by Iran.
And now, in the targeting of the other Arab countries, at first I found that shocking. It made no sense. I was like, why aren't they just going after military targets of the U.S. and of Israel? I've heard reporting that it's because the regime was fractured and they didn't have full control over, I guess, who was firing stuff. And so that you just had, people who were firing at, I guess, at targets that if the regime was still in.
I think what probably happened there is Iran set up a system that was basically like, if like a dead man switch, right? Like if the chain of command breaks, you have like these options. And so you're ordered to fire. And my guess is that, certain commanders either misread orders, misunderstood the information coming in, and were probably firing at targets that Tehran, if this commands are given from central command, wouldn't have ordered them to fire, but at the same time they were acting upon order. So it's not like one general was going rogue and ordering his people to do something. I think everybody was probably acting on their orders the way they interpreted them.
Well, now, after what I've read in the last day, the strategy kind of makes sense, because at first I was thinking, why would you want to pick a fight with more countries? But now I understand basically getting the partners to, or the other oil partners of the United States of America, to cast the blame on Israel and America and be like, why did you have to create this mess for all of us, which potentially makes the war more costly to the United States of America by engaging in it. So like I do somewhat understand that strategy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think there's some other aspects of it as well, like the Iran is firing missiles and drones, and even if it's at American military targets or hotels in Qatar that are housing American military forces. And so Iran would say those are legitimate targets. And if you interpret it that way, Qatar is spending their interceptors to try to shoot that down, and they're running out of interceptors. And so now they're going to the Americans asking for more, and the U.S. is giving them to Israel. And so I think from the Iranian perspective, you're showing the Arab states exactly where they fit in the hierarchy of the U.S. empire, and that actually America isn't such a good or reliable ally. And also, it is forcing Qatar and Saudi Arabia and the UAE to go to Washington and say, hey, end this war. This is killing our country. This is bleeding us dry. We cannot go on like this. And they do have leverage, not only over Washington and the amount of money that they invest in the U.S. And hell, I mean, maybe even I believe that it would be better if, the Qataris and the Saudis didn't have all this ownership and influence over U.S. companies. But from the perspective of Washington is a good thing. So they have leverage there, but they also have personal leverage over Donald Trump and his family, because all these kingdom sovereign wealth funds have invested and done business with Trump and with Kushner and with Wickoff and other people who are in the inner circle.
Now, it seems to me like our military is royally messing up, in that in this new generation of warfare, you need cheap drones. Otherwise, you're at risk for cheap drones taking out your incredibly expensive stuff and bleeding you dry. And from what I'm hearing, we're in this environment now where we're starting to deplete stockpiles from what they have out in the Pacific, and we've got these incredibly expensive missiles. And what happened to our U.S. war manufacturing that, one, we just seem to be behind the eight ball on having cheap drones to conduct warfare, and that we've got all this extremely expensive military equipment? And how is this we're spending Trump's budget is over $1 trillion. Now he's asking for an extra $500 billion. How do we have such depleted stockpiles? It just seems like with all the money being spent in our military, the fact that we don't have gear that better suits kind of the modern environment where you don't need all this expensive stuff, like that we're not craftier, and two, that even of the expensive stuff that we have such slow turnaround times and small stockpiles. What happened here that we seem to be in such a bad military manufacturing state?
Yeah, I mean, it's because, we don't have the arms industry is just a massive money laundering scheme, right? It's all about getting taxpayer dollars. It's not about designing a military that's meant to fight. That's why when you look at the production of, THAAD or Patriot missiles, it's a couple dozen a year. It's maybe 100 a year. It's nowhere near what you would need to fight an actual war, but it is enough to keep, the profits coming in to Lockheed Martin and Raytheon. And that's what this is all about. And so this military wasn't built to fight a war. It just wasn't. It was meant to be expensive and to have, multi-billion-dollar R&D budgets where all these, people could make huge pockets of money by, Lockheed will farm off the development of this particular thing to this little LLC, and everybody will make a bunch of money. But at the end of the day, it doesn't produce a fighter jet that's capable or produce factories that can make enough interceptors to possibly protect American soldiers if they were ever in a real war. And I mean, look, Robbie, we're in a war right now with Iran, a country that's broke, a country that was battered in a war just 6 months ago. I mean, imagine if this was a conflict with China or Russia, right? It would be unreal how unfit our military would be for actual combat. We have 2 aircraft carrier strike groups in the region. Most of our air defenses are in the region. A lot of our fighter jets, we're using our advanced bombers, and we're not breaking the back of the Iranians. And so, look, this is the clearest example of that. Our military was never actually built to fight a war. And as you said, the math just doesn't work. Interceptors are more expensive than offensive missiles. And so when you have the trade-off here, Iran is always going, with every exchange, Iran is winning 10, 20 to 1 as far as the dollar value goes, even if the interceptor works and shoots down the missile. And, I focus a lot on my show, and I think the war is going to come down. A big part of it too, can Iranian missile stockpiles outlast in a significant way the stockpile of American and Israeli interceptors? But there's other factors too. I mean, Pete Hegseth was talking about how we're close to having air dominance over Iran and we'll just be able to fly over their skies all day long. That may not be true. Iran may not be able to shoot down fighter jets, but they're going to be able to shoot down Reaper and Predator drones. Ansar Allah could do it all the time in Yemen. Iran will be able to figure out how to do it. It's not that hard. They don't move that fast. The technology is there and widespread. And fighter jets, they need maintenance and a lot of it. And you wouldn't think about all the different things that need to be replaced every few flights for a fighter jet. But if you're running these things 24/7 all day long, trying to fight a war in a country 3 or 4 times the size of Iraq, flying your warplanes over it all day long, they're going to need new tires, new brakes, new electrical components, eventually, new wings and new engines. And you're going to really strain the supply chains because, again, they're not there. They're not set up to fight a war. They're there just to make money for the companies that produce them. So this is, I think, going to show that the American military is going to be an absolute catastrophe for the U.S.
And because I did have that on my list of questions for you, the claim of dominance of the skies. The sales pitch there is, listen, we're going to be able to just go in there and blow up all their military gear. We won this war. It's just going to take us a couple more days or months, but we've got this because we got the air superiority. But if you don't know where they're stashing all the military gear, how does that help? So I was curious because it just boils down to the same equation in my head of how long can we sustain this and how expensive does it get versus them maintaining a stockpile and basically just outlasting us and their regime remains alive. But how much is that air superiority a factor? Do we actually have the ability to target where they're stashing all this stuff, or is it so decentralized that, it doesn't help to just be able to fly into their country and blow stuff up?
I mean, it doesn't seem to me that the U.S. yet has air superiority over Iran. I don't know for sure. Or look, Iran may be stashing even some of their air defenses. I think the kind of conventional wisdom is you would have all of your defenses for deployed in order to defend your country the best as possible. But maybe Iran calculates that, hey, if we keep some of these, missile defense systems behind, we pull them out in a couple months, we'll catch American fighter jets unsuspecting, and we'll be able to shoot them down. So, this idea that we're just going to beat the Iranian military and then they're not going to find ways to develop new military capabilities as the war is going on, maybe get imports of weapons from other countries, that's a potential possibility as well, or have stockpiles of even interceptors and air defenses that could one day stand up to the U.S. But I think a U.S. F-15 was shot down a couple days ago over northern Iraq. Of course, you had the incident where 3 U.S. fighter jets were shot down over Kuwait, apparently by a Kuwaiti fighter jet. I'm still trying to piece that one together. It seems like there's a lot of holes in that official story. But even if those were all friendly fire incidents, the idea that the Americans are still nervous enough that there are Iranian fighter jets out there, that they're shooting down their own fighter jets, would suggest to me that the U.S. doesn't have air superiority over Iran, or you wouldn't see these accidents occurring.
All right, so I'm going to hit you with one more question, and then we'll take some comments. And I do have a lot more for you, but one of the other storylines in terms of Iran making this war very costly for the United States of America is that it targeted at least one AI infrastructure building. I believe it was maybe Microsoft. But what's the story there of them now targeting, I guess, the big new tech center developments?
I thought I read a report that they attacked a Amazon data center Amazon in the UAE. Yeah. I don't know. I really don't know why Iran chose that particular target. Maybe, again, kind of like attacking the Gulf leadership. They feel like if they can put pressure on billionaires that maybe have some influence over Donald Trump, that this could be
I think it's that. I don't know. And also, if America's trying to partner with these other countries, and part of the partnership is we're going to offer you security and we're both going to invest in each other, and an American company makes a giant infrastructure development, and you now have the risk factor of, at any point in time, Israel can decide that they're going to go to war with Iran, and Iran might bomb our new development. It becomes a lot more expensive to, try and make these developments. So I just think it's part of the Iranian strategy to make this as expensive as possible for the United States of America, so that, in the future they don't want to go in and kick the beehive again. All right, let's take a couple comments. The chat's very active. We got a lot of people here. We'll start with SM2049. I'm going to defend Bill Perry for allowing the mic to combine because he was dealing with winding down the Cold War and decreased military budgets. I have no idea what that's about. Do you know?
I think he's referring to the former defense secretary, and there was a lot of consolidation of the defense industry as the Cold War was kind of winding down. I think that was during the Clinton administration, and I guess the companies were unhappy that the military budget was at least supposed to be declining, and so one of the things they got is just more consolidation. And so you went from having a lot of smaller defense contractors to just a few: Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, Huntington Ingalls, and Boeing, who get almost, I think, like 90% of the contracts from the Pentagon. It might be 80, it might be less than 90, but it's a majority, a lot of them.
I don't know if this is true, but it's funny. We make clones of the Iranian 20K drones for $35,000. Is that true?
I know that the U.S. is making copies of the Iranian drone. I didn't see the price tag on it, and honestly, I would be surprised if the U.S. military-industrial complex isn't at least quadrupling the price that the Iranians produce it for. $35,000 seems like a bargain.
There you go. All right. Before I move forward, I just want to plug real quick, everybody. I am going to start putting together Porch Tour soon. So if you got a backyard that I can do a comedy show at, shoot me an email, robsnewsroom@gmail.com. Put in the subject line Porch Tour, and just basically all I got to know is location and if you got a backyard that I can do a show from. That's really all I need to know. And then also, if you want to support the work for all of $5 a month, you go to robbernsteincomedy.com, where you can get premium content. We do longer episodes over there, and along with other stuff that I've been posting. Kyle, let them know all the stuff you got going on.
Yeah, the best thing you could do is check out my YouTube channel and subscribe to it, The Kyle Anzalone Show. I talk about foreign policy pretty much every episode. I have real experts come on my show, like, I had Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, former CIA Larry Johnson on the show recently, Douglas McGregor. This coming week, I'll have Matthew Ho and Daryl Cooper on the show. So, real knowledgeable people to break down all the wars and stuff like that. And then follow me on at Kyle Anzalone _. That's where you can find all the articles I write.
There you go. Jeremy Dahl is coming in, letting you know that Porch Tour was the best wife. Best wife. It was the best date I've had with my wife in the past couple years. 10 out of 10. Highly recommend. And before I get to my questions, I do like this question. This is from Ty Haggard 5914. Do you believe, as I do, that in 100 years we will look back at history and that we are in the first 5 years of, I think he said I think he meant how World War III started, or the start of World War III?
I don't know. I guess if I were a Chinese general right now, I would be absolutely urging Xi to go ahead and take Taiwan, that there's no way that America is moving their military assets out of the region. They don't have enough interceptors to defend their troops in the Middle East. Why not go now? So maybe at the same time, this could end up being like a 6-month long regional war, certainly a major conflict that will kill a lot of people, I think. But I guess I try to be careful about the World War predictions. And also, I will say, I had a fantastic time at Porch Tour with my wife as well. She's not a libertarian, and she had a great time.
There you go. That rules. All right. So now let's talk about oil disruptions. And I want to start by debunking this claim. I saw some people trying to make the claim that the reason why Donald Trump was doing this was because he wants to starve China from oil. And the goal is that once we've kind of taken away all their oil reserves, they're going to have no choice but to stand off on Taiwan. But then I looked into this. I think they were getting like 7% of their oil from Venezuela and about 14% from China. So the best case scenario is a 20% reduction in Chinese oil. I just don't see this as being the geopolitical play for absolute leverage over China. So that was kind of my quick back of the napkin grok math of, is this a true claim? But do you see this? Have you seen that reporting of this was a smart play to angle on weakening the Chinese empire, which is our true enemy, or is that just absolute nonsense in line with my my little notepad math?
Well, your notepad math is right, but I wouldn't underestimate how stupid Republican senators are. And I do think some of them believe that that's actually a thing. And so, it's not true, but that doesn't mean that it didn't impact the decision making at all. I think it probably did in the minds of some influential Republicans. I don't know about Donald Trump. He may understand the actual numbers. It can't be a serious part of the strategy. It could be a little add-on to, sweeten the deal for Donald Trump. Oh, and this will hurt China too. This will set bad China too. But like you said, for China, this isn't. I don't think it's a major thing. Now, China did plan $400 billion of investments in Iran over the next 20 years. Iran was a big part of the Belt and Road Initiative. They had joined Brits in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And so you do certainly remove a Middle East partner from China if you are able to remove the government of Tehran and install an American-friendly government. And so I just made that point to say the Chinese are invested in the Islamic Republic, and I do think they are going to take at least some degree of actions to ensure that a government that they are friendly with remains in Tehran.
Okay. And now, in terms of, there was a time in which I kind of saw, listen, Ukraine war, I think all of these are blunders. But I could see a Republican or a war hawk making the argument of, look, we bogged down Putin with a war that we didn't actually have to fight. And as a result, we were able to flip Venezuela. We didn't really flip Venezuela. We were able to flip Syria, and now they're bogged down, so we're able to flip Iran. The flip side of that is, firstly, we're spending all the money in the world. It's not like we got two other superpowers to fight each other and we could just be on the sidelines. But in addition to that, I'm now reading a lot of reporting that this is the greatest thing in the world for China because they're able to study all of our military gear. And basically, we're drawing down our own stockpiles and we're now stuck in a quagmire. So this is the best thing in the world for them. In terms of if you view that China and Russia are our enemy, which, by the way, now we're just driving the two of them closer together, which it would have made more sense to try and divide them, which was one of the stupidities of the Ukraine war. But just if we were looking at the world from the Republican worldview as a risks table and going, how do I stay ahead? How do I preserve my empire and stay ahead of Russia and China? If you actually had that worldview, which you and I can debunk as not being the smartest approach to life, you could just get along and trade with people and we could all be wealthier, and you're just spending money that we don't have. But anyways, we don't have to go down that. If I was playing this risk board and I was like, I want to defeat these other empires, so I'm going to start taking other properties and have their assets, are we winning here, or does this just benefit China?
No, I think it benefits China. In fact, Robbie, the week before this war started, there was a report that came out that said some officials in the Pentagon were concerned, and I think this might have been Elbridge Colby, but I don't. It was some officials, so who knows? It could have been some admiral or some colonel, or it could have been Elbridge Colby, other civilian official. Anyways, they were expressing concern that if we do this war, then we're not going to be prepared to prevent China from taking Taiwan. And I almost hesitate to make this argument because I am anti-war. I don't want to see the U.S. military go to war. I don't want to ever say something that could be used as war propaganda. But I do think that the U.S. embroiling itself in this Middle East quagmire will embolden China when it comes to their relationship with Taiwan. I don't think this necessarily means they'll invade our blockade right away, but I do think they're going to see that Taipei is effectively left without a partner. That even if they go calling to Washington, Washington has nothing to give them. Washington's distracted with their own conflict in the Middle East. And I really don't think Trump is going to divert American military resources from an ongoing war in Iran to Taiwan. And I think Russia and Ukraine as well will likely see a similar thing where I'm sure right now Trump is calling every single NATO country, Australia, Japan, South Korea, and shaking them down for every last bomb, every last interceptor, every last drone, every last spare part for an F-16, an F-35, an F-22 that those countries are willing to give to the United States and Israel. And look, I mean, we already did that for Ukraine. So I'm sure in a lot of countries, the cupboard is essentially bare. What they have is what they feel the minimum they need for their own defense industries. And they already promised the weapons to Ukraine. So I don't think there's a whole lot there. And this is certainly has to embolden Russia and China just because of the logistics in the American military and what we actually have in our stockpiles and what it means for the U.S. ability to give aid and support to either Ukraine or Taiwan.
All right. I wanted to get into the logistics of the Strait of Hormuz, but the people in the chat are being somewhat hilarious here. They're wondering if there's going to be a draft. If there is a draft, if that means that we're all going to be serving in the IDF and whether or not we'll be assigned tiny hats. I know that this was the most recent news story from today was, I didn't actually watch the video. I was on a flight, but I saw it on Twitter that Caroline Levitt made a statement about a draft. What do you think the likelihood of that is?
Yeah, I think she said the same thing. She's a broken record at this point. The president isn't going to take any options off the table.
Right.
So it's possible to me that is her just default answer to any question she doesn't actually know the answer to right away. So it could be overblown, the reaction to it. At the same time, I think this is something to absolutely freak out about and act as if we are actually going to see a draft in this country, because if they are serious, then, which is very possible, that they will just do it. And I guess, Robbie, me and you are probably a little bit too old now. We might just make
luckily
the
too fat
cutoff,
to serve. I'm gonna print those T-shirts for the fans. Too fat to serve. Don't draft me.
Everybody's gonna stop taking their Ozempic.
Yeah,
Gonna be throwing that in the trash. The stock of that company is gonna plummet next as all Americans try to get too fat to be drafted.
Suddenly everyone's going to be taking their fitness influencer content offline to be like, I'm out of shape, I can't serve. All right, on the question of the draft, I'm getting nervous about potentially more tech censorship coming our way. And what do you think we're going to start seeing wartime censorship over, podcasts like this, like we did during COVID, to try and convince the American people that we're winning?
Yes, unfortunately. I want to say that maybe our bailout here is the administration seems absolutely inept. That, there's a lot of things that happened during this war so far that really indicate that the U.S. didn't seem even fully prepared for this operation. I mean, the fact that we're now rushing 20,000 bombs to Israel. I mean, Israel didn't have a week worth of bombs or 2 weeks worth of bombs. And so we're now rushing, these things just all indicate a very disorganized, they don't have a coherent narrative. If you ask Marco Rubio, if Pete Hegseth, if you ask JD Vance, if you ask Donald Trump, if you ask the press secretary, you're going to get 5 different answers on why this war started and what our objectives are and how long it might last. I mean, key questions, right? The basic talking point outline, right? The 1-page memo that you would assume all of them read. And, when they ask you why this war started, you say this. When they ask you how long this war will last, you say this. The administration's unable to do that. However, there has been so much control over our media that's been consolidated by effective actors like the Ellison family. And so I do think we're going to see a good amount of censorship. I'm not sure if Elon is going to be on board for this war, so maybe we'll get a break over at X. And, one interesting thing, Robbie, is there are some classic neocons who don't seem on board with this. Bill Kristol, I see on Nets going after Trump for this war. And so, maybe you won't see the kind of lockdown censorship on sites like YouTube because the leadership to me seems more reflexively liberal. And maybe this is where they would stand up and pretend like they have free speech values.
Well, I think we've hit a low with Donald Trump that he does not seem to be concerned with the support of the base of the party anymore. Last week he made an announcement, hey, we're not doing deportations, essentially. We got some good people here and companies need workers. I'm going to play the clip on the next Run Your Mouth. But I'm just starting to see that it feels like Trump is pure deep state and he just doesn't care, which makes me really nervous because, he's making us look. I defended this guy while I was rooting for him against Kamala Harris. I did not vote for him. And I even said you can go watch it on Sam Tripoli's show. When we were getting into the beginning of Donald Trump, I said I'm a little concerned with Iran and I think he's going to be better on tech censorship. But if there's if on the Israel support category, that might make a comeback. I definitely said something pretty close to that if that wasn't the exact quote. Okay, so I'm getting nervous about, for all we heard about Donald Trump's a dictator, and I was like, all right, that's ridiculous. Guys, he's got some faults, but that's not it. I'm getting a little bit nervous for where the next 2 years might be going, as he seems to just not care about pleasing his base at all and just going with somebody else's agenda and what it might take for him to kind of continue to push forward with it. In terms of risks of where Donald Trump's going, do you think if this war gets ugly enough and bad enough and too expensive for the United States and Israel, that there's a possibility of us or Israel nuking Iran?
I'm very concerned about it. I have asked a lot of my guests, Larry Wilkerson, Douglas McGregor, and the answer I have gotten is they're concerned about Netanyahu using a nuclear bomb. I'm myself, I'm concerned about Trump using a nuclear bomb. If this comes to a point where the U.S. does run out of interceptors, our bombers have hit all the targets they could find in Iran, and now these bombing missions, they take 40-50 hours sometimes to fly from air bases in the Middle East to the Iran and back. That's a lot of flight hours on planes that need a lot of maintenance that we don't have a whole lot of. Like, if the U.S. isn't able to keep bombing Iran, and the U.S. doesn't have interceptors, and the Strait of Hormuz is shut down, and oil is 150, 175, God forbid, $200 a barrel, the economy is bad, and there's no other path to victory, I can't say that he wouldn't. I mean, Robbie, I'm like you. I spent, by 2015, I was doing this, or I've been doing this for a decade. And one of the first big stories that I covered podcasting was Russiagate being an absolute hoax. And this idea of Trump being a Nazi was absolutely stupid. And that the only pro-Nazi thing he did during his first administration was arm the Ukrainians. And that's the only thing that the liberals cheered him on for. And if you looked at his first administration, he was actually an inept administrator, right? He wasn't Adolf Hitler or Joseph Stalin or Lenin or Mao, who were able to give orders and have them followed. He was constantly undermined and ineffective and wasn't able to enact his immigration agenda or even his foreign policy, particularly when it came to, rolling back the American empire. They straight up lied to him about how many troops were in Syria in order to wait out Donald Trump and then keep the occupation of Syria, right? The court orders at the beginning of his first administration blocked all of his immigration restrictions. And this time around, it is a completely different Donald Trump. Now, maybe we were wrong, and this was always the guy that he was. He was always the authoritarian, and when he got to the second administration, he was not going to give a fuck anymore and turn into this absolute dictator. I think it has maybe a lot to do with age and the fact that they tried to throw him in jail during the time that he was out of office, and that he's too stupid to understand how they stole the 2020 election from him. And so he's like going in a blind rage about the mail-in votes and things like that, when he doesn't realize they use the media and COVID and the Black Lives Matter protests and things like that against him. And so I'm really worried about where Trump is going on at the authoritarian crackdown angle. I really wasn't, I saw a lot of people speculating that he wasn't planning to hold the midterm elections, and I wasn't concerned about that. But then he launched a war with 23% support. I mean, even if Donald Trump holds the midterm elections, it's going to be worse than a bloodbath for the Republicans. And then even worse, Robbie, he let all the Democrats vote against the war with the War Powers Resolution. And so Chuck Schumer and all the Democrats that are pro-Israel, that are pro-war with Iran, got to go on record voting against that war while all the Republicans voted for it. And so this war is going on in September, October, November, and we have the elections, and there's 100 dead American soldiers, and American bases are burning in the Middle East, and Iran is still firing missiles. I can't see anybody going to vote for a Republican.
All right, so now let's talk about the Kurds for a second here. The biggest suckers in all of human history keep making the mistake of partnering with the United States of America. Donald Trump said that he's not going to be partnering with the Kurds. The way I read that is that the Kurds actually turned him down. And so, of course, Donald Trump got on the news and went, "I'm not going to partner with a bunch of losers. These guys keep losing. I'm not interested."
Did he really do that?
No, he didn't actually say that. No, he just said
I could 100% believe it, Robbie.
He just said we're not going with the Kurds. What do you think is the likelihood of a ground invasion actually taking place? Because my guess is that just makes this disaster even worse.
Ground invasion, I think, is likely. I don't think they're going to use the Kurds. The Iraqi Peshmerga, which is the Iraqi Kurdish military, is very happy with the situation that they have in Iraq. And if they go to war in Iran, I think that starts a civil war in Iraq between the Iranian-backed forces in Iraq and the Iraqi Kurds. And also, the Iraqi Kurds have also been a standalone Kurdish group for some time. People like to talk about the Kurds need their own state that would stretch from Iran to Turkey, which is Kurdistan, but the different Kurdish factions are different. I mean, the YPG, which is the Syrian Kurds, and the PKK, which is the Turkish Kurds, are close, but the Peshmerga has actually worked with the Turkish government against the PKK and the YPG. So I don't think they're interested.
These Kurds ain't loyal.
They're not. I don't think they're interested in getting involved in a war with the Iranian government for the Iranian Kurds. And by the way, I do think that the CIA did something really, really nasty, Robbie. So Natasha Bertrand, who was one of the major Russiagators, she's definitely a deep state asset in the mainstream media, is the one who reported that the Iraqi Kurds were likely going to war for the United States. I think what they were trying to do is they had approached the Kurds, and the Kurds said no. So they then leaked this to the press, hoping the Iranians would overreact and attack the Kurds and then draw the Kurds into the conflict that way, right? Like they're willing to start a civil war in Iraq to fracture the Iranian state. I do think we're going to end up seeing U.S. ground forces in Iran. At the very least, I think they're going to try to go in and take Iran's 60% enriched nuclear uranium. I think they have what amounts to, I had to look it up in pounds because everybody always says 400 kilograms, but I have no idea what that means. It's about 1,000 pounds. It could apparently fit in about 6 scuba oxygen tanks that you would put on your mask. That's about the mass of this. 16, not 6. And so they're going to try to locate that and get it out of the country. They apparently don't know where it is currently.
So would that be a full-scale invasion, or basically special forces are going in, interrogating
Well, special
people?
forces would be the plan, but that would mean that it would go to plan, that they would go in, that they would secure it, and they would leave. If they try to go in and they get bogged down, who knows how far it escalates from there. Also, what happens if they can't find it? If they go on a raid, they look for it, maybe a couple of Americans die, and they turn up empty-handed. Also, Iran has, I think, 8,000 kilograms of like between 3 or 6 or 20% enriched uranium, which the U.S. might want to secure as well. And obviously that would take a far larger operation just based on the size and scale of the nuclear material we're talking about.
If we did a full-scale ground invasion, do we kick ass, or are they formidable? Like, they got a ton of soldiers? Because I know, I mean, it's crazy. I think against Iraq, 200,000 Iranians died, which just makes me think they're okay with a lot of death, which sounds to me like that's a difficult war.
I guess it's hard to predict the will of the Iranian people and how many of them would send their sons and daughters and how many young or old Iranians would enlist to fight. I would assume that the U.S. bombing of the school in the opening strike, the fact that, Tehran looks like hell right now, probably rallies a lot of people, around the flag, a lot of nationalism. People are wanting to enlist. And so I don't think a ground invasion goes well. Donald Trump says it won't happen until the Iranians are completely beaten, that their military is depleted. But this is a far larger and more advanced society and military than the Taliban. And it's, just as mountainous as Afghanistan is. So it's not like the U.S. is really going to know if the IRGC is completely taken out and beaten, or if they don't have weapons caches and stashes everywhere. At least when you're talking about missiles that could hit the United States ships or Israel, you're talking about fairly large missiles. But, if you're talking about a ground invasion, then Iran is just using small rockets. And, the U.S. has occupied Iraq for 2 decades, and the Iraqi forces are still finding those and firing them at Americans. And so it's not going to be neat and easy, even if the Iranian military is largely beaten by the time we invade. And I don't think it goes any better long term than Iraq does.
All right, I only have a couple more questions for you, and I'm realizing we completely skipped over the Strait of Hormuz. I don't know how that's pronounced. But this is one of the biggest variables of the war. Of course, Donald Trump has claimed that it's completely figured out, and it's not. But apparently, I guess 20% of the world's oil flows through there. And this is why you've already got countries, or maybe it's because of the strikes, but you got countries who are pulling out of their contracts and investments, saying it's a force majeure. Essentially, they can't meet the, I guess, prices that they had done futures contracts at, I'm assuming, of what they sold on oil, or they don't have the money that they promised to make U.S.-based investments. Now, I got to be honest, 20% doesn't sound like a doomsday number to me. If you told me 90% of the oil came through here, I'd be like, oh, we're finished. I feel like we should be able to stomach a 20%. Like, I understand. I mean, it's like if oil was $1 a gallon and then you take 20, I don't know the exact math, but like, what would gas go up to, $1.20? Like, it doesn't seem to me like it should be the end of the world, but everyone's like, this is the end. This is the big choke point. If they close down the Strait of Hormuz, oil prices are going to go up and everything's going to, the whole world is over. So I ask you, firstly, do they have full control over it? Does Donald Trump have a way to break that full control? I know Donald Trump is now socializing protection for oil vehicles, that he's saying they're going to escort them and offer them insurance or something along those lines. But maybe you can give us the actual breakdown on what the real story is there.
Yeah, I guess on the world oil economics, that's just a little bit outside of my expertise in oil contracts and things like that on how that's going to affect the markets. We will have an article tomorrow at antiwar.com by David Stockman where he
Love
gets
him.
into this a
every
little
day.
bit. And yeah, I would check out what he kind of has an explanation in there, and I can't articulate it well enough. I just read it once about how, when you're talking about oil markets, it's not when you take 20% of the oil supply, it's a compounding.
Right.
Go ahead.
To give the short, I also have to reread it because I gave it one quick skim on the plane. But he was saying it's already a problem with the even just current delays, and that the problem is only going to compound for longer. So he was like, this is already a massive problem in terms of oil pricing, and it's only going to get worse with the more days that the war goes on. But I didn't quite totally grasp. For some reason, I seem to remember the price tag of $5 a gallon. But like you, I got to reread the article.
Yeah, I think it has to do with this shortage problem gets worse over time. And when you're talking about oil, and he explains why in the article, it's not just a 20% increase, it's a doubling of the price because of, I guess, how valuable that oil is. It's going to get bid up. One thing that I feel like I could speak a little bit more on is that there are specific countries that are very vulnerable. Japan, South Korea, some of the other Southeast Asian countries, to being cut off from Iranian oil. I think maybe South Korea talked about just having a couple days without having to dip into their strategic reserves. And of course, then you're talking about weeks, maybe months, until they're getting very desperate for oil. You've already seen the Trump administration lift, I believe, a temporary sanctions reprieve to the Indians to import Russian oil.
I was going to bring that one up because it's in terms of people who are like into this, we're beating Russia, we're beating China, and the geopolitics of it. That was a giant concession that Donald Trump got, because at the beginning of the Ukraine war, it was over because basically China and India did not get our back and continued to buy natural gas from them. And so we were going at it alone. And so he finally got India to be like, all right, we're not going to buy their natural gas anymore. And then as a result of this war, I guess there's such few gas reserves or whatever that he turned around and said, in the meantime, you can go back to buying the Russian stuff, which if you think we're winning against Russia and China right now, that seemed to me like it was a pretty big win for Trump in terms of maybe trying to get some leverage against Russia for a better deal that Zelensky might accept. And that is now just out the window.
Yeah. Absolutely. The last point I was going to make is just the not Saudi Arabia as much. And I believe the UAE does have the ability to export some oil through a pipeline via Saudi Arabia in the Red Sea, which, I mean, I would assume Ansar Allah Yemen would have some ability to say no to that. But for particularly Bahrain, Kuwait, and Qatar, this is a situation where they are dependent on income from oil. And if oil is not flowing out, money is not coming back in. and how long can you sustain your very repressive society without all the handouts and loyalty that you have through bribes that come in through this oil revenue. So I think that's a big factor in this. Isn't just like the oil being taken off the market, but how it's going to impact certain countries, and a lot of them seem very entrenched in the American orbit, like the Koreans, the Japanese, and the Gulf Arab states.
There you go. Well, we got Jack Burden, 806, calling me out for being a dumbass with the quick reaction. 20% supply drawdown does not equal 20% rise in price. It will have a ton of other inflationary effects. Fair enough. And then we got Jeremy Dahl, considering we have a fiat currency that is based on the petro bond and our currency is reaching the interest spiral, reduction of the petro bond exasperates the inflation from QE. That's like a math riddle of just of buzzwords for problems. But I do think we have benefited, even though Gene Epstein has said it's not really a storyline because you can just convert money real easily. But I do think that the petrodollar situation does help the dollar. Maybe that's just because I like conspiracy theories. And I do think that our partners in the region finding out that we're not that great at protecting them and keeping their business running smoothly might make more of a movement away from the dollar and not be this incredible outing by Donald Trump to ensure that there is no BRICS or other currencies. All right, I'm going to hit you with one more question. You ready for this?
Yep.
All right. I think we can all agree, as much as we hate the Iran war, and we're going to talk out against the Iran war, we can't let go of the Epstein files. So this is a two-part question. One is, do you think Donald Trump launched this war as a distraction for the Epstein files, or was it more pressure from Netanyahu to finally get his regime change while Donald Trump, before the midterms, might be able to get it done? And two, is this storyline about Epstein funding ISIS actually true? That was the latest conspiracy. There was an email from Epstein. I don't know if you saw it, but I'm curious if you got any of the details on that conspiracy.
No, I have to look at that one. I've been covering Iran news pretty much 24/7 for the past
they're getting
week,
us.
so
We're falling sucker here, buddy.
So, I mean, look, for everybody who says they did this to distract from Epstein, I can't disprove it, and the facts prove out that that is what's happening, right? And look, especially in the independent media, when you talk about like part of the problem and breaking points, and even like Tim Dillon, right? We only do so many shows a week, and we're all individual people for the most part. And so we could only cover one major story at a time. And so Epstein has fallen. I don't think that's the reason. I think there are multiple things going on. I think a part of it is Trump's hubris. It has to do with how successful Maduro, that operation was, how much control and influence Zionists have. I think there's a Christian Zionist and Christian Trump was sent from God to do this. A belief that really exists in the White House, and I think probably contributes to Trump's hubris. There was an argument that Marco Rubio made that I think might have convinced Trump, which is Iran was out producing missiles faster than the U.S. was producing interceptors. So the longer that we wait, the more likely it's going to be that Iran will be better prepared than we are. So waiting doesn't benefit us in any way. I think there's probably a lot of those type of arguments that all added up with Donald Trump and got him to pull the trigger. But ultimately, I think a lot of it had to do with Maduro being successful and Donald Trump wanting to be able to say he did all these great things for the country and dealt with all these problems that other presidents couldn't.
All right, let's take a couple comments and then we'll call it a day. We'll be back with more coverage on Wednesday. And of course, please go follow Kyle's show because he gets in the weeds with with the real experts. All right. We already got into the nuke thing. Jeremy Dahl, if less oil is sold in dollars, then the Federal Reserve notes will lose value even quicker on top of the inflationary spending. Checks out to me. At Jeremy Dahl, that's what concerns me. Allegedly, Iron Dome is failing. I guess the concern is that if the Iron Dome fails, Israel might result in the nukes, which you and I have mentioned it as being a problem. I don't know. You got any other thoughts on that?
No, I do think, if Israel is getting hit more and more and more, eventually Netanyahu could turn to using nuclear weapons. I think at least in the short term, Netanyahu would probably threaten to use nuclear weapons to either get the U.S. to do more carpet bombing of Iran and to try to break the will of the Iranians, or to get more military assets from the
Need help
U.S.
liberate them.
before actually resorting to it. Right. Robbie, you know, they would be wearing burqas if they weren't dead. So the life is better that way.
There you go. All right, I think we had a pretty good scope of the current situation, and hope to have you back on, and hopefully good developments.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Robbie. I always love being on Running Your Mouth.
All right, later, everybody. Hold on.